Hello, Planeswalkers! Welcome back to Partners With. My name is Andrew, and today I'm bringing you another deck tech. Today we're looking at Valduk, Keeper of the Flame. Valduk is an uncommon legendary creature from Dominaria. This deck runs a Voltron strategy where you suit up Valduk and create a lot of elementals to just overwhelm your opponents. Valduk is a 3/2 human shaman for 2 and a red that says at the beginning of its combat on your turn, for each aura and equipment attached to Valduk, Keeper of the Flame, create a 3/1 red elemental creature token with trample and haste. Exile those tokens at the beginning of the next end step. I'm so excited to talk about them today, and I'm also trying out a different way of making one of these deck tech videos. It's less scripted. I know in basic outline of what I want to talk about and the order in which I want to talk about them, but I'm not reading it off of a document like I did the last deck tech, and that is just me. Tyler's doing his own thing with his own deck techs. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. First up, we're going to talk about our forms of mana ramp. This is going to include ways of generating mana, finding more lands, as well as drawing cards. The first 2 cards we're going to look at are Burnished Heart and Traveler's Amulet. Both of these are artifacts that you can sacrifice to search your deck for a couple of basic lands. Next up is Joyrus Familiar, which is an artifact creature that makes historic spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. This includes legendary spells and artifacts you cast. We've also got Nyx Lotus, which is a legendary artifact that enters tapped. You may tap it and choose a color, and add an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. Here we have a couple of spells that let you exile cards off the top of your library and then play them for as long as they're exiled. These are Outpost Siege and Furious Rise. Outpost Siege is an enchantment that says you may choose Khans or Dragons when it enters the battlefield. If you choose Khans, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your turn, you may play that card. If you choose Dragons, whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, Outpost Siege deals 1 damage to target creature or player. This actually has 2 uses, because you can either use it for card advantage by choosing Khans and letting it exile cards, essentially adding them to your hand until the end of the turn, or you can choose Dragons, because with Valduk, you're going to be creating a lot of elementals, and every time your turn ends, those elementals are all going to die, triggering Outpost Siege if you choose Dragons. Next is Furious Rise, a newer enchantment. It says at the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until you exile another card with Furious Rise. This card is not going to be online until you put some equipment on Valduk, but because that's the whole point of the deck, that's not going to be too difficult to do. Pretty much any equipment that you put on Valduk is going to make him at least a 4/2, putting Furious Rise online. Fires of Invention is a personal favorite of mine, especially in this deck. It's an enchantment that says you can cast spells only during your turn, and you can cast no more than 2 spells each turn. You may cast spells with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control without paying their mana costs. This is great for this deck, because it lets you play cards for free, which is already good, but since this is an artifact equipment heavy deck, you can then save that mana that you would spend on your spells for paying equip costs for equipment. This way you can play a couple of spells that you want each turn and still have enough mana left over to suit up Valduk in the same turn. Next up, we're going to look at some draw spells that have some downsides. This is the way that Red likes to do draw spells. So first we have Browbeat, which says any player may have Browbeat deal 5 damage to him or her. If no one does, target player draws 3 cards. So this way, if none of your players want to pay any health, you can just draw 3 cards, which is nice, but most of the time they're going to be taking 5 damage, which also helps you. It just means that you won't draw those cards. Next are a few cards that like to have us discard the same number of cards that we draw, which is typical card draw for Red. We have Tormenting Voice, Dragon Mantle, and Thrill of Possibility. Tormenting Voice says, as an additional cost to cast it, discard a card, and then you may draw 2 cards. Dragon Mantle says, enchant creature. When Dragon Mantle enters the battlefield, draw a card. So this one you actually have to equip to a creature in order to draw the card. Thrill of Possibility says as an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, then draw 2 cards. It's exactly the same as Tormenting Voice, except that it's an instant. We've also got the Planeswalker for our deck, Duretti, Scrap Savant. Ready is a 3 loyalty planeswalker that says +2, discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. -2, sacrifice an artifact. If you do, return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. -10, you get an emblem with, whenever an artifact is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return that card to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. This card is perfect for this deck with how much it plays with artifacts and how much it can give us new cards in exchange for old ones. Next up, we're going to go over all of our artifacts and enchantments that we're going to be putting onto Valduk. First, we got the generic equipment that just increases Valduk's power and toughness. These are Riot Gear, Kite Shield, and Bone Splitter. Next up, we're going to take a look at cards that make Valduk harder to block or impossible to block. These are Fearsome Temper, Prowler's Helm, Cobbled Wings, Wings of Hubris, and Angelic Armaments. Fearsome Temper says you can pay 2 and a red, target creature can't block this creature this turn. So you can target your opponent's most powerful blocker and say, no, you don't get to participate this combat. Next we've got Prowler's Helm, which says that the creature can't be blocked except by walls. And then the other 3 just give Valduk flying, which is always nice. Next up we got a couple of artifacts and enchantments that give Valduk Trample. These are Brawler's Plate and Tilinali's Crown. These are great once you get Valduk really pumped up and you can actually start swinging with him, although most of the time you're not going to be swinging with Valduk because you want him to stay safe. These next upcoming artifact and enchantments give Valduk First Strike and make it a little more safe to attack with him. These are Sharpened Pitchfork, Spearpoint Oread, and Lightning Talons. Something to note about Spearpoint Oread is it's from Theros, so it's an enchantment creature that has Bestow. You pay 5 and a red instead of the creature's mana cost, and that turns it into an artifact aura that you can attach to a creature. So that way you can give First Strike and +2/+2 to Valduk instead of just making a 2/2 First Strike Nymph. These next 2 artifacts, Loxodon Warhammer and Butcher's Cleaver, simply give Valduk lifelink, and Loxodon Warhammer actually also gives him Trample. Very nice. Next we have our 3 most important cards in this category, starting with Embercleave. Embercleave is a legendary artifact equipment that costs 4 red that has Flash. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each attacking creature you control. When Embercleave enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has Double Strike and Trample, and it normally equips for 3. So what you want to do is you want to start combat with Valduk suited up already, make your elementals, and if you have 4 or more elementals, Embercleave only costs 2 red mana to just immediately play it and equip it to Valduk without paying anything extra to put it on him. Next we've got Blackblade Reforged, which is a legendary artifact equipment that costs 2 generic mana. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 for each land you control. Equipped legendary creature 3, equipped creature 7. So it's cheaper to equip this to Valduk than any other creature. Burning Anger is an enchantment aura that costs 4 and a red that says, enchanted creature has tap. This creature deals damage equal to its power to any creature or player. Now this is great when you have Valduk all suited up, he's huge, he's powerful, you tap him, you can just say, destroy that creature, essentially, like deal 10 damage to it, deal 10 damage to that player. If they're already at low health, you can just take a player out of the game with this card. It's fantastic. Lastly, for this category, we have all the enchantments and equipments that don't really super matter. These are just things that I threw in here because they're okay. Some of them do some interesting things, but nothing too notable. These are some of the first cards that you can cut for better equipment. But without further ado, let's start listing these off. We have Armory of Iroas, Frenzied Rage, Hero's Blade, Gorgon's Head, Runed Stalactite, Piston Sledge, Rogue's Gloves, Murderer's Axe, Prying Blade, Screaming Shield, and Haunted Plate Mail. Once again, these are going to be some of the first equipment to go once you find yourself some better replacement equipment. This next category I like to call Kick 'em in the Shins, because that's really all you're doing with these cards, is beating your enemies when they're down. First we got a few staples for red, in Perforos, God of the Forge, Impact Tremors, and Warstorm Surge. These are all enchantments that hurt your opponents when your creatures enter the battlefield, which, with Valduk, every turn you should be making lots of elementals, triggering these cards repeatedly. Perforos, God of the Forge, and Impact Tremors are very similar cards. Perforos says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, he deals 2 damage to each opponent. Impact does the same effect for half the mana, except it deals only 1 damage to each opponent. Warstorm Surge is a little bit weaker than the other two, it costs more mana, but it says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. If you have just 2 elementals entering the battlefield, that's 6 power you can put wherever you want. You can use that to remove a threat, or use that to kick an opponent when they're down. Next we have a few ways of taking advantage of all those elementals after combat, but before they're sacrificed at the end of the turn. First is Altar of Dementia, which is pretty straightforward. Sacrifice a creature, target player puts the number of cards equal to the creature's power from the top of their library into their graveyard. This card's in here to just give a little supplemental mill, cause why not? Next you have Spawning Pit, which is another artifact that says sacrifice a creature, put a charge counter on it, pay 1 and remove 2 charge counters from Spawning Pit, put a 2/2 spawn artifact creature token into play. This way you can sacrifice 2 of your elementals before they're sacrificed by Valduk's effect at the end of the turn, and then you can just pay 1 mana and do Spawning Pit and replace those 2 elementals with a permanent 2/2. Next we have Mask of Emulation, which is a slower sack outlet, but it works. It's an artifact equipment for 1 and a red that says when it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 red elemental creature token, then attach Mask of Emulation to it. Equipped creature has, sacrifice this creature, it deals 1 damage to any target, and you can equip for 2 mana. So basically, if you have all the mana to spare, you can start equipping this to your elementals after combat, sacrificing them each time, and dealing a little bit of supplemental damage to your opponents. Next we got a few general good cards for this deck. You got Champion of the Flame, which is a 1/1 human warrior for 1 and a red with trample. It says he gets +2/+2 for each aura and equipment attached to it. Basically this card is in here in case Valduk gets too expensive to cast. If you've cast him and had him removed too many times and he costs a lot of mana to play, you can just play Champion of the Flame and do less than Valduk can do, but still, this warrior is going to get huge. Then we've got Storm's Wrath, which is a sorcery for 2 red that deals 4 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. This is a good board wipe in red. And we got Might Makes Right, which is an enchantment for 5 and a red that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control each creature on the battlefield with the greatest power, gain control of target creature and opponent controls until the end of the turn. Untap that creature and it gains haste until end of turn. This is a sort of repeatable act of treason that you can do as long as Valduk is the biggest thing on the field, which is pretty likely with all the equipment and enchantments we're running. Last we have Fall of the Hammer, which is an instant for 1 and a red. It says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. This is just a simple, use Valduk's massive power to zot something off the field. Next up we have our defense strategy, which starts off with Renegade Tactics, a sorcery for 1 red. Target creature can't block this turn, and then you draw a card. So it replaces itself and you make it so that your opponent's biggest defender can't do anything that turn. Grafdigger's Cage is an artifact for 1 mana that says creatures in graveyards and libraries can't enter the battlefield. Players can't cast spells from graveyards and libraries. This is to prevent any and all graveyard shenanigans, because we don't like those. We really don't like those in this deck. Next is Bloodthirsty Blade, which is an interesting artifact equipment. It costs 2 mana, and it says equipped creature has +2/+0 and is goaded. And goaded means it attacks each combat if able, and attacks a player other than you if able. It costs 1 mana, and then you attach it to target creature and opponent controls. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. So instead of putting it on your stuff, you're putting it on your opponent's things, and those things that are equipped with it just can't attack you, which is fantastic. Now we've got Mattock Compass, which is an artifact for 2 mana that says 3 and tap, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your library. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 7 or more lands, transform it. So at first glance you would think, why isn't this card in the ramp category instead of the defense category? And that is because of the flip effect. because when it flips, it becomes Spires over Orazka. It's a land that says tap and add 1 colorless to your mana pool, and then untap target attacking creature an opponent controls, and remove it from combat. This means if your opponents swing at you with something really scary, you can just tap this and say, no, actually it does not attack this turn. For our last real strategy, we have support, and this is full of cards that just boost your elementals. We got Street Riot, which gives +1/+0 and gives Trample, although they already have Trample. Paragon of Fierce Defiance, which is a human warrior that says other red creatures you control get +1/+1. Orcish Oriflamme, which gives +1/+0 to attacking creatures you control. Heraldic Banner, which has you choose a color, and then creatures of the chosen color you control get +1/+0, and then you may tap it to add 1 mana of any color. There's Icon of Ancestry, which has you choose a creature type when it enters the battlefield, and creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. Lastly, for the support category is Storm Herald, a 3/2 human shaman with haste that says, when it enters the battlefield, return any number of aura cards from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to creatures you control. Exile those auras at the beginning of your next end step. If those auras would leave the battlefield, exile them instead of putting them anywhere else. Storm Herald just lets you recur all of your enchantment auras that would otherwise be lost to time as soon as Valduk is blown up once. Finally, we come to our mana base, which is made up of Mage Ring Network, G2 Enchantment, Smoldering Spires, and 35 Mountains. But any deck can be improved, so now let's look at a few notable upgrades. We can add in Ogre Battle Driver and take out a mountain. We can add in Bravado and take out another mountain. We've got a lot of mountains in this deck. We can put in Torbrand of Redfell, take out a 3rd mountain. We can add in Skullclamp, Ashnod's Altar, Shadow Spear, and Mirror Shield, and take out some of our throwaway artifacts that I mentioned earlier. Additionally, it might be a good idea to put in a few of those swords. You know, like Swords of Sinew and Seal, Sword of Feast and Famine, all of those. Although they are more expensive, you can swap them out for any of those throwaway equipment that I mentioned earlier. Another thing to note, if the sword that you put in has protection from red, be careful with that, because putting that on Valduk means that Valduk will not be able to be targeted by any of your red spells either. And there you have it. This isn't the most optimal version of the deck, it's just the version of it that I run in paper, hence why I put in the upgrade point at the end there. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a comment down below. Let me know what you think of this deck. And if you want to see more from us, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell for notifications. Have a great day, y'all.